Be sure to subscribe for your chance to win a custom leather playmat when we hit 2,500 subscribers. Here we go with all of the green cards from Zendikar Rising, starting out with the Adventure Awaits. 1 in the green, look at the top 5 of your library. You can reveal a creature and put it into your hand and then the rest go on the bottom in random order. If you didn't get a card off of that, then you can draw a card. It actually kind of fixes the feel bads of some of the cards like we've seen in the past. I don't think it's worth the downside of not being able to get all of those creatures. So we've had Winding Ways, we've had the 2 and a green one that is played in Pauper all the time. It's been reprinted a bunch of times where it's 3 mana. But yeah, it does address the feel bads, which is probably a good thing that people have the option of not just totally whiffing on that. Ancient Green Warden, 4 and 2 green for a huge 5/7 body. It has reach. You can play lands from your graveyard. And if a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. So this is a roided up Crucible of Worlds or Raminap Excavator. And I think Commander decks are certainly going to enjoy this card. I mean, that is a big, big body that can win games on its own, but also, I mean, gives you just a massive, massive upside with that Crucible tacked on. Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. Power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, and non-token creatures you control are forests in addition to their other types. I mean, that is, again, like this is a great card for Commander, and this one's going to be really good in your pre-release pool as well. I mean, you're talking about all of your non-token creatures being forests, which means she is also a forest. So you're playing it on turn 5 off of 5 lands. That means that she's also going to be a land, so you're getting a 6/6 for 5 at least. This is just going to be absolutely gigantic. And yeah, it's just a big dumb beater, but that's what green likes sometimes. Balaged Recovery, 2 and a green to return a card from your graveyard to your hand, plus it can come down as a land. Pretty quality magic card. Regrowth is actually one of the more powerful cards in Vintage for a very long time. So the fact that this can get any card is pretty attractive. I'd be surprised if Commander decks don't take full advantage of this, and I wouldn't even be surprised if yeah, I mean, this card is just interesting. There's a lot of subtlety to these cards, like the ability to build decks with no lands, or like a Belcher deck, oops, all spells. There's a new deck that people are playing around with in Modern already, which I think is putting up some results in testing. And even like the synergy with like wishes, like Cunning Wish and Burning Wish to be able to go get a land is interesting. So yeah, I think these are going to be really fun to see how they kind of fit into the metagame. I'm optimistic that they're not a mistake. I think they just look like they're going to be good cards, but we'll see. I mean, some of the Belcher variants definitely have people concerned. Broken Wings, 2 and a green, destroy artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. I actually like this one a lot for green. Plummet and similar effects where they just destroy a creature with flying have pretty much been relegated to the sideboard for the most part when you're talking about your pre-release pool. It just feels really bad when you draw them in matchups where they don't actually have any flyers. But this gives you enough versatility that's probably fine to main deck. There are artifacts that you're going to be potentially worried about, enchantments that your opponent might be even playing on your creatures to kind of remove them from a relevant board state. And I think this card's probably going to be good enough to main deck, which is not something I'd usually say about a card with destroy creature with flying. Usually those are a little too narrow, and you can't afford to be drawing that against decks that are just like super tempo oriented, very fast, aggressive beats. You draw that card against a army of ground and pound creatures, and you're just done. So probably fine. Be able to like take out a piece of equipment in that type of matchup. Canopy Baloth, 4 power, 4/3. We've seen a bunch of those, but this one has maybe the biggest upside. +2/+2 with landfall is going to be just dominant on the board. So turn 5, you're going to be able to play your land and get this guy out there. And it also really improves the quality of mana acceleration. So if you do have any of we've seen at least one mana dork, this guy coming out on turn 3 and then attacking and then having all of those extra land drops, that really does punish your opponent. Crag Plate Baloth, 7 casting costs, 6/6 with hexproof and haste, and it can't be countered. And if you kick it, it's going to get 4 +1/+1 counters. This one's fine. It's overcost. Well, it's expensive. Let's say that. It may not be overcosted for what it is. It's certainly expensive. It doesn't have trample, and I mean, I'm probably going to sleeve this up if I'm in green, but it's definitely not a reason for me to go green. It is an expensive card. I mean, there are plenty of times where you never hit 7 mana in a sealed event. So if this is your first pre-release, make sure you have fun. Make sure you're sleeving up cards that you're excited to play. That is actually a really important part of the learning process. Eventually, over time, you'll be excited by cards that are actually good, and that'll just come from years of playing and like actually being able to figure out what's going to do well. To me, this card feels like something that I'll sleeve up if I'm in that color, but I'm not going to be super psyched about it. And, you know, as far as rares go, there's definitely better in the set. Dauntless Survivor, 1 in the green for a 1/1, enters the battlefield. You put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. A little variant on our 2/2 creatures for 2. Those are really kind of the bread and butter of your sealed pool. A lot of the time, they're your pawns, so to speak, where you're going to be getting them out on board. They're going to trade off with your opponent's cards, and eventually you'll kind of get towards the bigger creatures, which will potentially crowd those out, which make combat tricks so important. There's an ebb and a flow to these type of games, and this guy is a nice variant on that because you can potentially, instead of just having him be a garbage 2/2 in the late game, once those other creatures have been established, he can be kind of a spell, giving a +1/+1 counter to the most important creature on your board, and then also the ability to have synergy with the things that care about +1/+1 counters makes this guy, I mean, you're going to be sleeving him up. But I'd probably be more psyched to sleeve up him than that 7 casting cost card, just because of how often you're not going to actually hit 7. Gnarly Colony, if it was kicked, comes in with 2 +1/+1 counters, and each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter has trample. So throwback to the previous card, this guy is going to be a 4/4 for 5, which is great. And then also, you know, he's going to have trample when you've kicked him, and that is a static ability. So even if you don't kick him, he just still comes down and gives all your creatures with +1/+1 counters trample. So this is the type of synergy I'm talking about. They're across multiple colors, and +1/+1 counters can be more than just a +1/+1 in this set, thanks to all these static abilities. This guy I like a lot too. Inscription of Abundance, 1 in a green, or you can kick it for 5 to get all of these, but you're just going to choose 1 if you're paying 2 mana, which is going to be 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. Target player gaining X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures they control, and target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. That is a really good magic card for a pre-release pool. Combat tricks are an important part of it, especially when we're talking about those early turns, attacking into your opponent's creatures. If you're able to pump your creature and have a permanent bonus like that +2/+2, I mean, that is a massive, massive swing. So you attack with a 2/2 into their 2/2. If they block, you turn yours into a 4/4, squish theirs, and then they've got to deal with a 4/4 somehow when they're already down a card. I mean, that practically wins the game on the spot. Really like this card. And then the fact that the life gain is probably the least exciting, but I'll get to that in a second. Being able to, this will resolve in the order that it's printed on the card. So you're going to put the 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. You can then have that creature fight something, and then that life gain. Normally, you don't want to play life gain just as a straight up single card. Like if a card said gain 5 life for 1 green, probably would never play that in your sealed pool. Like, it's actually just not a good Magic card. I don't know what the number would need to be for me to actually change my mind on that, but life gain on its own is generally bad, but life gain tacked onto stuff can often be very good because life gain is bad, people don't necessarily have a way to deal with it. Like, you don't normally have to deal with it, because if your opponent's just playing bad cards that only gain them life, you play a couple of cards out of your hand that are like gain 5 life, well, you're just not committing to the board, and they'll just kill you a turn or two later. Like, it just delays the inevitable. You're not actually committing to the board and interacting with it. But when it's tacked onto stuff, while you're also dealing with your opponent's creatures and not falling behind, then that can actually be very interesting to pull you kind of out of reach of burn, or make sure that your opponent can't possibly, with a combat trick, push through lethal, or even better, respond to a combat trick to deny it. That can be brutal. Your opponent thinks that they're swinging out for the win, and then you play something like this, kill one of their creatures, gain some life, and then win on the crackback. I mean, I just really like this card a lot. Way more excited about this thing than that 7 mana hasty boy. Iridescent Hornbeetle, 5 mana for a 3/4. At the beginning of your end step, create a 1/1 green insect token for each +1/+1 counter you've put on creatures. Green seems like it has the best interaction with those +1/+1 counters, and this one's going to be a dangerous card. Going wide is probably better than it might think. I don't know. I think casual players might get how good going wide is. Young Pyromancer shows us the way in Legacy. I mean, that card for only 2 mana creates these 1/1s, and that value ends up just really mattering. Of course, everybody recognizes how good Monastery Mentor ends up being, because the tokens have prowess, so they're not really just 1/1s. They're essentially part of a combo that finishes the game. This guy is going to be a bit of a problem, and I'll definitely give him a pass with the kind of suboptimal stats. The 3/4 for 5, not super good. Definitely overcosted, but given this ability, I think he could end up being just fine. Jorarga Visionary, a elf wizard, so part of your party, enters the battlefield, draws a card. I like this card. I might even like this card in some type of mid-rangey pauper deck. Just entering the battlefield, drawing a card. It's might be a little too expensive for that, but it is an elf wizard, and that is totally fine. It's going to trade up sometimes, and sometimes it's going to trade down, but drawing a card, and I'm sure there'll be commander decks that use this as a role play, just a little team player to be able to pick it up and put it down and draw cards. This is an additional Elvish Visionary. We've got a lot of them now. We've got the Lanor Visionary, Elvish Visionary, that. We've always had Multani's Acolyte from Urza's Legacy. So, yeah, this is a little incremental card draw kind of getting out there for elves. Kazandu Mammoth, 3 casting costs, 3/3, which is already very, very good. Landfall gets +2/+2, and it can come in as a land. Again, this is a card that I'd be really psyched to have if I'm going green. It could be a reason to go green, as this is just going to be massive. I mean, that's like Phyrexian Negator stats. I mean, 5/5s for 3 used to be like insanely overpowered, and now, I mean, you're getting this guy. Now, doesn't have trample, but I mean, what can you say? I think this card's actually very, very good for limited. Might even be good enough for constructed. Just we'll see about that. I mean, but 3 mana, 5/5 is pretty big. Kazandu Nectar Pot, 1 and a green for a 1/3. The landfall here, gaining a point of life. Not super psyched about this. Could be okay in a really defensive sealed deck, but in general, I want a little bit more power out of my 2-drops. Hitting for 2, it's such a difference. I mean, I know it's twice as much power, so maybe it feels obvious, but like a 20-turn clock isn't really a clock. Like it's not even a plan. It's like a wish. Like, you're not actually going to get there attacking for 1 a turn with this card. It's literally just never going to happen. Play a million Magic games, just not going to happen. A 2/2 for 2 can go the distance. Like, that absolutely, Like you can close things out. If your opponent stumbles, you get a little bit of support. I mean, you'll close the game out 2 damage at a time eventually. Of course, you want a faster clock than that. Usually if you can do 4 or 5 damage a turn and just get it out of there in like 3 or 4 turns, that now we're talking. But 20 turn clock with this guy, not super exciting. Kazandu Stomper, 5 and a green for a 6/5 trample. When it enters the battlefield, return up to 2 lands you control to their owner's hand, getting you those extra landfall triggers. He does have trample, which is nice to be able to push through. And yeah, he's a little expensive, but probably going to end up playing that in your sealed pool. Colony Ambush. So we're going to be able to fight for 3, which is a lot to fight something, but it also can come in as a land. And this one's probably fine. Creature removal is a premium type of card for your pre-release pool, so this one you're going to be sleeving up in all likelihood as well. Lotus Cobra is back. Just taking in that art. It is beautiful art. I do really like the original quite a lot. I don't know if you can call it subtle, but the lotus impression on the cobra's hood there is very well executed. But we've got a 2/1 for 2, which can enter into those early combat steps. But before you turn it sideways on turn 2, you're going to be getting some extra mana, accelerating you up the curve, which can be so dangerous. I think this card's going to be something you're very happy to sleeve up. It has been, certainly every time that it's been printed in a limited format, this has been a totally fine card, not only for the acceleration, but also the mana fixing. So that card, definitely a solid rare. Might of Murasa, 2 mana instant to give a creature +3/+3, which is about on par. I mean, it's fine. Like your combat tricks, you're going to want them to cost 1 or 2. Obviously, 1's better, but let's take a look and see what else we can get on this. And the kicker, I think, makes this actually a card to be really afraid of. +5/+5. You're going to have to really think through your blocks in both directions, like allowing a creature through at the end of the game, and also whether or not you're going to be blocking without having tricks of your own in your hand, because you can get really blown out by this. This is definitely a lot of damage. Murasa Brute, 2 and a green for a 3/3. I really like this card. This is the type of thing that I think green very often has the best creatures, is kind of what they try and have happen. And, well, the best dumb creatures, just like no abilities, just how big is that body compared to the casting cost. And a 3/3 for 3 is really good. It does trump pretty much the entire range of 2-drops, and that's the type of card that I actually feel really good about when I get like 3 or 4 of that in a seal pool. I mean, I feel like I'm going to easily win a pre-release with that. Murasa Sprouting, another 3/3 for 3. This one uncommon, so it actually has an upside, which, I mean, you don't even need, but it's you'll take it for sure. The upside being you can return a card with a kicker from your graveyard to your hand. So on curve, this is a very dangerous threat. You can start really applying pressure, putting your opponent in situations where they have to block and get blown up by combat tricks. And then later on in the game, you can potentially get back a kicker, either one of those pump spells or one of your creatures that have died. This one's very high quality in my estimation. Nissa's Zendikar, 3 and a green to Enchanted Land, make it a 4/4 elemental with reach and haste, and when Enchanted Land dies, return that card to its owner's hand. So, I mean, this one's fine. I mean, it's haste. I'll take the haste. Like, that's really nice. I like the fact that the land comes back, because it feels really bad when you animate your lands and then your opponent kills them, and now you're like behind on the mana race. So this one's good. You know, it's not pushed, I wouldn't say at all. I mean, it's a 5 mana play, so to speak. Like, you're going to be playing this on a land, and I kind of like that they give the creature haste, just because that eliminates the feel bad. So lands have summoning sickness. Everything has summoning sickness. only creatures are affected by it. So if you played this on a land and you didn't have haste, then that land would not be able to attack that turn, which is really gross for like beginners, where like, let's say you play like your full art land for turn, and then you play a card like this targeting the full art because that's the one you want to be attacking with, because, you know, you're being a little bit of a Timmy, which is fine. I mean, everyone can indulge in that every once in a while, you know, letting out your inner Timmy. But like, if it's definitely the full art land and it's definitely the one you played this turn, then you definitely can't attack with it unless it has haste. So that would be like terrible feel bads. Be like, oh, you're a donkey. You could have just played that on one of your other lands and you would have won. And instead, you played it on your summoning sick land like a fool. So that eliminates those feel bads. And I think that's definitely the right play for Magic right now. It is a very different game than what I started playing in terms of the severity of consequences for little inaccuracies. They're really trying to remove kind of the little tiny niche things like that from being just absolute blowouts. Orin Reef Ooze, 2 and a green for a 2/2, enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, and when it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature with a +1/+1 counter. I mean, green is looking really scary here. It really is. I mean, this can be a 3/3 that when it attacks becomes a 4/4 for 3 mana. This is a rare that will be bigger, right? It'll be like bigger than that 6/6. I don't know why I'm disliking that card so much. I just feel like it's a trap. In a world where they've removed so many of the feel bads, I feel like this guy is just going to be so much bigger by the time that other guy is even castable. And yeah, I mean, that's a big effect. I mean, ramping up your whole team like that, this card is very dangerous. Rabid Bite, 1 and a green. We've seen it before. Creature you control deals damage to its power to a creature you don't control. And it's not fighting. Like, you're just dealing the damage. So this one way better than that fight card from previously for the most part. There's a couple of times where it matters, like lifelink. Sometimes you're happy to have the creature actually dealing. Actually, no, that works here too. I guess it receiving damage. So there are some times when like a creature taking damage triggers something. This one, it's just solid. You're obviously going to play this and be very, very happy with that. In the early game, you can make your 2/2s kill the opposing 2/2s and continue apply the pressure. And, you know, later on, your fatties in green can just absolutely be a wrecking ball. Reclaim the Wastes, 1 green to search your library for basic land and reveal it. Or if you kick it for an extra 3, you can search for 2. Not the type of card that I'm going to sleeve up in a pre-release typically. It's mana fixing, but it doesn't actually interact with the board. And usually you don't want to play cards like this. You pretty much want to have creature removal, creatures, combat tricks, kind of in that order of importance. And this one doesn't really fit that calculation. There are times where mana ramp can be really important, but this isn't even mana ramp. It's just kind of mana fixing in a set that seems like it's not going to be too difficult to fix with. And yeah, just not being able to get one of those lands into the battlefield like a Kodoma's Reach, for example. From a historical perspective, this card feels bad. Though there may be some decks that really need the help if you're going some type of crazy 5-color pile. Scale the Heights, 2 and a green to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, gain 2 life, and you can play an additional land this turn. Draw a card. So like a mini Euro of sorts. Instead of getting a 6/6 body, eventually you're drawing the card. I'm sorry, you're getting a +1/+1 counter. You draw a card for both of them. This one's pretty playable, I think. I definitely wouldn't be embarrassed to have this as one of the later cards in my 23 or 22 playables. It's going to be, as they say, like your 40th card. And yeah, it seems fine. I mean, it might actually be better than that. Getting the extra land drop is not nothing, and there's a lot of synergy with +1/+1 counters. Shoot. I don't know. I feel like I should know how to say that already. There's a Scoot mob that's been around. I'm going to go with Scoot. Scoot Swarm, 2 and a green for a 1/1, but that landfall is going to create a 1/1 green insect token, and if you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. So this card, a little difficult to say how good it's going to be. I'm probably not psyched about this in my pre-release pool. It definitely gets out of hand if you have 6 or more lands. Like, that is going to be fun. Like, you're going to be making, just like every land is going to make another one of these guys, which is going to make more and more tokens every time. So that's really fun. I think this will probably be a lot of fun in Commander and a lot of disappointment in your pre-release pool. Could be wrong. It could end up being a good card, but it's always a 1/1, always super fragile. There are a bunch of cards that have ETBs that are like worst case do 1 or give a -1/-1, and this guy can easily be kind of taken out with like any piece of removal in the format. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's not the best argument. Dies to removal is not the best argument, but it dies to all of the removal. So this guy feels like something that you'd kind of want to win the game for you, and it just may not be able to. Could be good, though. Skyclave Pickaxe. This one's dangerous. 1 green to give a +2/+2, and like all of the equipment that we've seen so far, when it enters the battlefield, attaches to a creature. So I like this one a lot. I think I'm just liking green the most out of all of this. In terms of winning pre-releases, I feel like green may be the strongest color. I mean, it's just got a lot of aggression, and you can definitely take people out while they're kind of stumbling. I mean, the pre-release decks are not on the same power level as a constructed deck. I mean, it's just not. You're playing a 40-card deck. You're hoping to hit some of your best cards, your rares and mythics that are like super powerful. And 40 cards allows you to do that more often, to be fair, but you only have 1 copy too, so it's not like you've got 4 copies in a 60-card deck. So this type of card is actually really good to be able to push through damage early, and then later on turn any of those other creatures into legitimate threats. So even slapping this on a 1/1 makes it a threat that can potentially trade up with like 4 casting cost cards. Spring Mantle Cleric, 4 in a green, enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 for each mana color spent on it. So if you're on that crazy 5-color pile, you are going to be able to pay all 5 for it. Nicely executed card here. Again, I feel like they were watching Lord of the Rings when they made this set. This one looks like Arwen a little bit. Yeah. Big creature for just a little bit of a mana investment here. Like if you're going like 2 or 3 colors, I mean, that can be pretty big, but if you're able to get all 5, I mean, that is a dangerous Magic card. Strength of Solidarity, 1 green. Choose a creature you control, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature in your party. That one's also pretty good. Now, it's not instant speed, so it's not so much a combat trick as just like a what are you going to do about it trick. So like the equipment, you're able to slap that on your 2-drop and just turn it sideways and just be like, whatever, like block or not. Like you can start chump blocking now if you want, but I'm pretty sure you're just going to start taking damage and hope to find an answer later. And that's kind of what this puts on the table, is if you're playing this on like turn 3 and you've got a couple of other creatures on board, I mean, this is going to do +2/+2 or maybe +3/+3 permanently. Which is a lot. I mean, we jumped through hoops with the Morbid card in Pauper. It's a little early in the morning over here. I'm not going to get it. No, I'm not going to get it. Oh, Howl of the Hunger Pack? Wow, I got it, guys. Swarm Shambler, 1 green. When it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent becomes a target of a spell an opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter, put a +1/+1 green insect creature token, and then you can pay 1 to put a +1/+1 counter on Swarm Shambler. I mangled that one, but I do these in one take, so sorry guys. This is a 1 green for a 1/1 that can keep growing. That is definitely dangerous, and the ability to get +1/+1 counters at the end of turn, or, you know, block, pump. I mean, this is going to get out of hand. It's a 1-drop, which is actually solid, which is unusual. Usually 1-drops are just not going to be very playable in your pre-release pool. And yeah, I mean, this would be a heck of a curve. If you lead out with this, and then anytime you have extra mana, you can just grow it. I mean, that is going to make it very difficult for your opponent to attack into you, and eventually you can just start turning this thing sideways. I think this one's totally fine for a 1-drop, which I don't usually sign off on for your pre-release pool, but I think this one is a totally acceptable 1-drop. Tajaru, Blight Blade, 1 casting cost, 1/1 with Death Touch. It's a rogue. I'm not usually excited about these. This pretty much has to be exclusively defensive. I mean, it can attack. It's totally fine, but it's only chipping away at 1 a turn. So, I mean, maybe you can rely on pump effects and be happy with that. Not typically how I construct my pre-release pools. I try and make them more independent. Like, I like to embrace synergy when there is some, but I also like the components of that to be totally fine on their own. I am not usually impressed with this. We've seen a lot of Death Touch for really any cost, but a lot of the time it's just 1 mana. And I guess my typical formula ends up being, you know, kind of committing to the board and then eventually winning with creatures with evasion or efficient creatures plus combat tricks and removal. And I mean, this guy, you know, is potentially a pain to deal with, but I mean, he can't really win the game on his own, and that is the type of thing that I tend to be critical of, is, you know, when you have a guy that's just a 1/1 that can't actually leverage getting control over the board. Like, let's say there's a bunch of combat and, you know, you top deck this guy and he's the only creature on the battlefield. You're certainly not winning from there. Tajaru, Paragon, 1 in a green for a 3/2. Now we're talking. That is really, really solid. It's also going to help out fill any role that you don't have in your party. This one can pick up one of those roles easily, and it's got a kicker on top of it when it enters the battlefield if it was kicked. So for 5 mana, you're going to reveal 6 cards from your library and put a creature card that shares a type into your hand. So you're going to be able to get a cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard off the top of your deck very often with this card. And that is a card I'd be very pleased. I'm probably going to be trying to force green if I've got any of these cards that I'm excited about. But, I mean, that is easily a card that you're going to be super happy to play if you're already in green. Tajaru, Snarecaster, 1/4 with reach. Again, 1 power creatures, generally not super excited about. Tough to make that work. It is an elf rogue, so if you've got the synergy, that's an upside there. Tangled, Floral, Hedron. I get the feeling like mana acceleration is going to be really good in this format, especially if you have a lot of landfall. So I think this card's, despite not being an aggressive drop, if you in draft, for example, have multiple of these, I could definitely see you kind of pushing past the 2-drop slot into the 3 and 4 drops more frequently, and going big could be an option here. I like this card. It also can come in as a land if you actually need that landfall trigger, but more often than not, you're going to want to take the acceleration from this if you're able to make a land drop that turn anyways. And yeah, it's also a body. Just an elemental, though, not going to help out with the party. Taunting, Arbor Mage, 2 and a green for a 2/3, which is, you know, a little small, but we'll check out the rest of the card, which is this kicker. And all creatures able to block target creature this turn do so. Devastating effect. Definitely going to want to sleeve this thing up. And that effect, for those unfamiliar with it, mostly reads win the game. Like, as long as you're building your deck to be aggressive and actually commit to the board, you know, you don't want to have a bunch of 1-power creatures supporting this guy. But if you have sufficient creatures to go along with this guy, the all creatures have to block target creature really reads all your other creatures are unblockable. That's the real exciting part about it. Is it's funny because they print cards that are just like, oh, when all creatures have to block this, and like when this creature dies, you draw 3 cards, and all sorts of stuff that they've done in recent sets. And it's like, yeah, if you attack with a creature that they have to block everything else gets through, that's usually the game. Like that's how it tends to play out. So this one's really dangerous. It will abruptly end many games in your pre-release events. Though I guess we're all playing from home now, so you won't see it from the other tables anymore, but that one is definitely going to be ending a lot of people's games. Territorial Scythe Cat, 2 and a green for a 2/1 with trample, and the landfall puts a +1/+1 counter on it. I think this one's fine. It's a little underwhelming at first, very vulnerable to some of the pinging effects that we have, but I mean, eventually it's going to really get out of hand, and the trample gives it a type of evasion where it's not just going to be able to be chump blocked by a 1/1 and held off kind of indefinitely. This thing's going to have to be dealt with, or it is going to deal with you. Turn Timber Aesthetic, 4 and a green for a 5/4. When it enters the battlefield, you're gaining 3 life, and that one's kind of, when I was talking about life gain earlier, that's the type of life gain that can be like a real pain, where it's like, I was attacking with some flyers, I had a 3-turn clock, all of a sudden now it's like a 4-turn clock, plus I've got to deal with this 5/4, and I definitely don't want to do it by bouncing it. I think this is totally fine, and you're going to be sleeving that card up, and it happens to be a cleric. Turn Timber Symbiosis. It is interesting that the mode on this that people are the most excited about, I think, or at least I'm the most excited about, I won't speak for everyone, it comes in as a land and gives you a lot of options for decks that don't want lands in them. So Belcher, Oops All Spells, that type of thing. The green, red, and black I think are the most interesting right now, but all of them are worth examining, and the fact that you can literally play a Magic deck with 20 lands that enter the battlefield untapped, I mean, that's new territory. It's really interesting. It's giving a boost to those strategies which were inconsistent, and now just have a much, much better way to commit mana to the board to do what they do. And then also, there are decks that don't care about the 3 life. Like if you're playing a deck that wins on the 2nd or 3rd turn, or even the 1st turn if we're talking Legacy or Vintage, who cares about the 3 life? It's not even a talking point. So we'll read the rest of this card though, but for the most part, this is a forest that does 3 to you, that doesn't screw up your shenanigans with Goblin Charbelcher or Undercity Informant or Balustrade Spy, anything like that. Turn Timber Symbiosis, 4 and 3 green to look at the top 7 of your library. You can put a creature onto the battlefield. If the creature's converted mana cost was 3 or less, it enters with 3 +1/+1 counters, put the rest on the bottom. So, I mean, I'm certain Commander players are going to play the heck out of this card. It's obviously going to be better than your 25th Forest or however many basics you're running. And the fact that this is going to have so much constructed play, I mean, I'm going to be interested to see the pricing on all of these. I think the fact that Commander players now set pricing is something that the market is not really adjusted for. I think people, for the most part, are still often evaluating cards based off of how good they're going to be in constructed. I mean, I know I'm mostly doing that when I look at the cards. I'm curious how I'm going to be able to use these in Legacy and what I might be playing against. But Commander players really are the majority of players, I believe, at this point, and they've reached the level of sophistication where they're buying singles. I mean, Commander players have leveled up over the last however many years as a group, similarly to how tournament players individually leveled up back in the day. So we're at the point now where casual players have shed the stigma of net decking. Now we've got great sites like EDH Rec and other resources that people are using to build their decks. For a long time, that was lame. That was net decking. That was cheat. Like, oh, what are you doing? Like, it's supposed to do it on your own. They finally recognize that it's totally fine to collaborate with all the other mages out there to come out with really sweet decks and build things that actually work. And similarly, people didn't like the idea, casual players really didn't like the idea of buying singles. It was just like, oh, you just buy the packs and you build with what you got. Now they want to build sweet decks. They want to have what they want instead of just kind of settling for whatever they happen to find. So we are really seeing casual players getting more and more sophisticated. The cards that they like are, they're still, I will say casual players are still at the point where they're justifying life loss by saying like, oh, but you got 40 life, so it's not that big a deal. But maybe they'll never get over that. Like, that's totally possible. They're casual players for a reason. They're not fully into the hardest elements of the game in terms of like the more in-depth strategy. But that's just kind of where they are. So I rambled for a bit there, but casual players are setting the pricing. I have no idea what's going to happen with these mythics because I think every commander deck is going to want them because it is just so much better than playing another basic. And they're also embracing the cards that have drawbacks because they have 40 life. So 3 life, they're like, oh, I've got 40 life. Even though that's not the reason it's good. Like, it's really good even if you start with 20 life. Like, Ancient Tomb is just an incredibly good Magic card, period. It's good enough for vintage play. It's good enough for literally the most powerful decks, period, possible to make in any constructed format. Ancient Tomb's good enough. And casual players right now recognize that it's good. They're just a little off there. They're a little inaccurate. They're like, oh, it's good because we have 40 life. It's like, no, it's good, period. It's good at 20 life. But yes, you're correct. It is good. Welcome to the party because you can do a lot of awesome stuff once you start embracing the really good cards in Magic. You can do some pretty crazy things, and that is going to be part of that equation for many people. 1 green to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, or can come in as a land. I like the subtlety of this card. It's not splashy, simple text, but that +1/+1 counter can make a massive difference. Instant speed, super important for this type of effect, especially if you're able to survive combat and have that +1/+1 counter just be a permanent thing, of course. So yeah, this one's definitely going to be part of your pre-release pool. It's also the type of card that you may end up cutting if you have too many of those effects. You don't need too many combat tricks. That is something to keep in mind. You really want a bunch of creature removal, a really good curve of creatures that is aggressive, that has creatures with creature removal tend to be the most important. So things that can tap to kill other creatures or do damage, or ETB, take out a creature, those absolute premium. Then we're talking about creatures with evasion. Then we're talking about efficiently costed creatures. So creatures like a 3 power for 2 is like at the top of the list. By the time you get down to that part of the list, that's like the beginning of the top of that little section. And of course, bigger creatures that are mana efficient. I mean, that is a big part of winning, is having a nice curve where you can continually commit to the board and just keep applying that pressure, or at least stabilize if you've got some bombs that you're trying to draw to. Vastwood Surge, 3 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield tapped. Plus, if you've got a kicker on here of 4 more mana to do 2 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. You know, there may be some 5-color green in this set. So if draft ends up being like a 5-color green situation, this card definitely be part of that mix. It's a little late from a historical perspective. So the last time 5-color green was really good in my remembrance was like Kamigawa block, but I actually missed a bunch of draft sets with like real seriousness. I mean, I drafted Kamigawa block probably, I can't even guess how many dozens of times. So for me, it was a lot. I mean, Sakura Tribe Elders, Kodoma's Reaches, a lot of common speed mana ramp meant that 5-color green was actually probably the best deck in that format, really, especially by the end. Usually not recommended, but, you know, sometimes pre-release you just got a bunch of different colored cards and you want to play around, and that one will definitely help you out a lot if that's the case. Veteran Adventurer, another multi-class here, plus the spell costs 1 less for each creature in your party. So if you've already got a full party, you're going to be paying just 2 mana for this 5/5 with Vigilance, and he's going to help out filling in for the rest of your party if you don't have the full party. Vine Gecko, 1 in a green for a 2/2. The first kicked spell each turn costs 1 less to cast for you, and whenever you cast a kick spell, put a +1/+1 counter on him. Another solid 2-drop, and yeah, I kind of feel like green got the best of it. I don't know. That's all of the colored cards here. We're going to go into the multicolored lands and artifacts in the next video, but let me know what you think the best color is now that we've been through all of this together. And I will hopefully you will have a great pre-release weekend.